we talked a little bit about oral progesterone becoming alloprogenolone and putting you to sleep. And okay, that's great, but that's not the point, right? So you, in your protocol, have cream, transdermal progesterone. Can you tell me a little bit about, more qualitatively, about the cream form of progesterone and how that works as opposed to the oral form? Because what I am now hearing a lot more is vaginal and rectal administration of progesterone.
You don't put hormones where the sun don't shine, okay? You just don't. You don't put them in your ear, your nose, your behind, your vagina. No, you don't do that. Because in order for endocrinology to be endocrinology, it must have pulsatility and amplitude.
Do you know why you take your thyroid medication in the morning? Do you know why we say if you're going to take vitamin D as a supplement, take it in the morning? Do you know why you take melatonin at night? There's a reason for all of these things. There is a time of day that certain supplements, certain hormones act better in the body than others. Melatonin is generally taken to induce sleep. Vitamin D is the sunshine hormone. You take it during the day. The thyroid hormone is best taken in the morning so that you have enough energy to power your metabolism through the day. So just as these hormones, we know that there is a time to take them. I want to talk about this field of medicine called chronotherapy or chronobiology. Scientists like Dr. Sachin Panda, who's written the book Circadian Code, talks a lot about the importance of timing in our lives. In the same way, I wonder how important might be the rhythmicity of our hormones in our life. When we supplement hormones after menopause, when we take HRT, most of the time, 99% of the time, when prescribers prescribe this HRT, it is taken as a static dose, the same amount of dose every day. But that's not how our body produces hormones when we are pre-menopausal, right? We go through a rhythm. We go through an estrogen rhythm. We go through a progesterone rhythm. These are hormones that vary a lot from day to day in how much our body produces. After menopause, when we prescribe static doses, we have to wonder, is that best for us? Or should we try prescribing a rhythmic dose so women can feel even better than they normally can? So the question for me right now is, how do we know if static dosing is good for women or if rhythmic dosing is better? Certainly one big difference is if a woman does rhythmic dosing, she will have a period. And understandably, most women do not want to be bothered with periods for the rest of their lives. Agreed. Putting that aside, are there any benefits to doing rhythmic hormones after menopause or not? I feel this is still an open question and something that I am really trying to get to the bottom of and understand what is it that's really the right thing for us. I think it's a worthwhile question, and today I am back with TS Wiley, continuing our conversation from last time.
There she is.
Maybe today is not going to be the day.
I don't know.
Today is going to be the
We
day.
tried 3 or 4 different things, and there's no internets, and there's internets, and there's no iCloud. No, there's iCloud. It just doesn't seem to want to work.
Life is like that. Okay, so TS, I am glad to be back with you again today. I really enjoyed our conversation last time,
Good.
and I'm looking forward to another conversation today. Okay, so last time we talked about sex lies and menopause. I have so many more questions about the same book still, and I also want to touch on Lights Out. Right. So there's a lot to talk about. But I just wanted to circle back with one thing again, I just keep coming back to that, which is like, you explained how you grew up on a farm, you had 5 kids, you paid attention to the natural world around you, right? But still, when you started thinking about hormones for yourself, had you come across the idea of dosing rhythmically ever at all, at any place?
No, I had a hot flash in a kitchen in a rented apartment in New York City. My kids were going to the UN school for the summer, and I didn't like it. And I thought, this has to be estrogen, because the news was full of the Women's Health Initiative. That's what probably sparked my thinking about taking hormones. And I kept listening to them tell us that it would kill us, that we would get cancer, that we could not have hormones. And being who I am, logically, if estrogen killed women, all women would be dead. If estrogen killed pregnant women, all pregnant women would be dead. So it could not be that estrogen, progesterone, hormones were causing my hot flash unless I didn't have enough. Too much, you'd be young, you'd be fine. So it had to be too little. And then I started thinking about the fact that women die, get cancer, osteoporosis, on and on and on at midlife. And I was at midlife. I was 42, maybe 43. And I thought, well, you'd be running out of hormones. You wouldn't have more hormones then. And if it made you sick to run out of hormones, we were missing something. We were missing putting them back. And then I started to think about how to put them back. They had patches, they had shots, they had all sorts of things. And I thought to myself, I don't want that. First of all, it's synthetic. It was always synthetic. It wasn't real hormones. So as we drove back home from New York through Chicago to see my daughter at the University of Chicago, I went into Pritzker Medical School to the library, and I bought an enormous amount of books, had them sent to Santa Barbara, where I lived. And then I sat down at the table with a stack of them on one side, and I went through each one, and I made notes, and I read, and I put it over here. And eventually, this rack became this rack. I had gone through 12 endocrinology textbooks and some pregnancy stuff and some whatever. And there was not one of those books that showed a graph taking hormones in a straight line. Not one. They all had the same rhythmic picture. And it was obvious to me that that's how you make hormones. And there were details like FSH is up and down and HBH. I mean, there were just so many details that I could pick up that supported the idea that it would be rhythmic. And I thought, well, maybe that's it. Maybe it's not what you take, it's how you take it. Maybe it's not how much you take, it's how much you receive. So I just kept reading. And I found a pharmacist who would put it in 3 ml syringes for me so I could figure out dosing, because I'd have to dose by going up and down and add in progesterone on day 14. And then I got interested in receptors, because that's the key to the whole thing. The key to the whole thing is how much you receive. And I finally figured out that on day 12, the peak of estrogen, you provoked LH, luteinizing hormone. And that had to do with ovulating if you're young. And the luteinizing hormone eventually popped, and that was progesterone, the bubble. And the progesterone had nowhere to go if it didn't have receptors. So it occurred to me that the receptors had to come from the progesterone on day 12. That had to be part of it. So then I got interested in genetics, because it's the genetics. It's estrogen response element. You hit on the gene. It hits the progesterone promoter region, or sends up a piece of, actually it's an antibody, and part of it's out of the cell and part of it's in the cell. And the parts that's out of the cell reconfigures into a receptor. So then when that progesterone goes flying out of the corpus luteum, it fits in there. And when it hits in there, it goes back down to the progesterone promoter region. And we get apoptosis, cells that die, that should die, that carve our whole body. We get osteoblastic. We get better bones. We get all kinds of coating on nerve cells in the brain everywhere. That's what happens when you have nerve diseases. The coating on the cells starts to wear off. There were so many things you could see in these textbooks you get from progesterone. And estrogen, on the other hand, takes it away. Estrogen is osteoclastic and eats your bone. That's why as you get older and you've got low-level estrogen pouring, you're going to get osteoporosis, right? Eventually, it was like the crossword puzzle. And I figured out what did what. And it wasn't that complicated. It was just, you had a period for 5 days, estrogen goes up, it hits the spot where it turns itself off. It promotes LH, it promotes progesterone receptors. It does all sorts of things as it drops. And then we do it again with progesterone, but differently. So that's what happened. I got curious. I got interested. And I knew there had to be an answer, and the answer wasn't too many hormones.
So one of the other things you said last time was that what the symptom is, it's when the symptom is.
That's right. In fact, I send out to doctors plasticized pieces of paper. It's called a cheat sheet, and it shows the rhythm, but it explains that it's not the symptom. It's when the symptom is. So you have a massive headache. And is that headache on day 8? Or is that headache in the progesterone part of the cycle? And if the headache's on day 8, it's receptors fluctuating. And if you spread out your dose, take a little bit in the morning, a little bit, instead of 2 doses, the receptors slow down. They have to be at the same rhythm. And if you're pouring too much estrogen in there, because we make medicine, we're not young. If we pour too much estrogen in there, it'll give you a headache because it goes up and down and up and down. And if you have the headache in the progesterone part, you don't have enough estrogen. That's a migraine. That's something else. So
it's not the actual symptom. So it could be, if it's a day 8 symptom, could it be any symptom?
No, if it's a day 8 symptom and it's any symptom, the answer is still fluctuating receptors, because you can have a headache, you can have tinnitus, you can have anxiety, you can have anything that's vibrating, And a lot of things vibrate, from headaches to stomach aches to whatever. It doesn't matter. It's the receptors. And if you spread out the receptors within 2-3 days, it's gone and it doesn't come back, because the receptors have learned how much estrogen's coming.
My next question is really, how do you know when a woman is getting dosed right on rhythmic dosing? And my understanding is, if a woman has a 5-day period and a full period, like a second day is heavier than the first one, and day 3, 4, 5, and she doesn't have other symptoms that impact quality of life, is that how would you answer that question? How do you know a woman is getting dosed right?
Well, I've explained before that your uterus is like a computer monitor. If your monitor stops working, you don't throw it out the window. You go get it fixed. If your uterus is not working, in other words, you bleed too much, you bleed too little, you have fibroids, there's so many things that can go wrong. You figure out what it is and fix it. It's hormones and endocrinology are like coding. It's computer stuff. So you recode the uterus. In other words, let's say you should have a 5 to 6 day period. Could be 7, but 5 to 6 days. And you're building a lining. The myometrium, the muscle wall, is taking stem cells and pushing off the lining. So that's a period.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, when you get done with that period, you start building another one, right? You start building another lining, the endometrium. So you've got a uterus and you don't have a period and you've taken your estrogen, and why not? And you should have a period, because every time you take enough hormones in the right way, you not only have a period, you don't get breast cancer, your bones change, everything, your entire body remakes itself. So if you're not having a period and you're taking your estrogen, something's wrong. And usually when the doctors look, there's a very thin lining. You're not absorbing it. You don't have enough to have a period. So then we figure out why you wouldn't absorb.
I am trying to, there's no studies written up about
No.
rhythmic dosing,
No.
right? So the only way I can get some information out is okay, if I don't have the studies, what about case studies, right? If there are
Sure.
no trials, then what about case studies? Whoever is prescribing rhythmic hormones should be able to write a whole series of case studies.
Sure.
Right? Okay. So then perhaps these practitioners don't want to put their names with these case studies for some reason.
Well,
For whatever reason.
they're all embarrassed. They're all sure they'll go to jail. They're all sure everybody will get cancer. And it's been 22 years and they don't get cancer.
But this is what I'm saying. The women that have been on rhythmic dosing, right? If we were to study them,
That's right.
for 20 years, let's say women have been on. So we should be able to see what is the do they have any heart disease? Do they have any cancer? And you've said that there have been some cases of lobular cancer. That's about it. That you told me.
After 65 years old.
Okay. So,
I don't know why.
So if somebody could study a bunch of women that have been on rhythmic dosing and kind of compare them to another age-matched set of women that have been on static dosing and another age-matched group which have not been on any hormones, that would be a really good way to check. This is a retrospective.
We know from the Women's Health Initiative that women on static dosing have heart attacks and have strokes. Progesterone does it because all of that's synthetic stuff. You can also think about it and realize that if it's going like this when you're young, actually I have drawings of this, and the estrogen stays up and the progesterone's not really happening because you're not really ovulating well. And you can figure out just by thinking about it that as it gets flatter and flatter, you get sicker and sicker. That's when women get cancer. That's when women have a heart attack.
Yes. So theoretically, I think this makes sense. And my concern is, okay, if this makes sense, and a lot of women agree because they have been doing this for a while, and the presumption is that they've been healthy, they've been feeling good. That's why they've been doing it for decades. Otherwise, why would they do it?
2 decades.
Right. So if they're doing it, so then somebody should get curious enough to study this and kind of say, okay, theoretically, if it makes sense, let's see if we can test it out and write it down so that this can be something that can be, people don't have to be afraid. People don't have to kind of feel that this is something crazy, controversial, whatever. If that's my whole purpose here is getting to the best understanding of how the rhythmic dosing is done. Theoretically, I think it makes sense. But you know how our world is and how the world of medicine is. And so it would be helpful to figure out a way to get some data that we can publish that can be out there in the world. And perhaps more women be helped. If this is the way that is much better than static dosing, then it would be great to do that.
We've got the last 20 years. Nobody got better. Okay. And right now there's an article that's being just shoved around the internet. Some doctors, and I think it might even be Johns Hopkins, have decided to get rid of menopause. They're going to figure out how, because it's too hard on women. Now tell me what's wrong with that.
Well, okay. Are you talking about this whole ovarian freezing and all of that?
You can't get rid of menopause. It's part of metabolism. You can get rid of a symptom. They've got something for hot flashes now. You can make women believe it's gone, but you will kill them faster because you must have metabolic endocrine response to be alive. You can't get rid of menopause.
I actually don't know what is being talked about when they say getting rid of menopause.
Well,
Like the only way I know is,
they're going to try to fool everybody and get rid of symptoms. That's all. 'Cause
I
you
mean,
can't
I
get rid
gotta
of it.
say, we are smarter than that.
Or
Yeah, but that's been the whole,
well,
yeah,
maybe they think,
yeah.
hysterectomies. Maybe they think ovariectomies. Maybe they think you just cut breasts off. I don't know what they think. I can never imagine what they think. But they say they're going to get rid of menopause, and you can't.
I want to just touch base on one more thing that you talked about last time, which was that when any supplements work, they are working because they hit steroid receptor. And static dosing of supplements puts a line through your rhythmic hormones.
You
Can you say a
cross it
little bit
out.
more about that?
Yeah.
So, first of all supplements don't act on steroid receptors, right?
Well, it depends on what you're doing. If you're doing minerals like magnesium and all of those things, they're working across a different map. But the ones that women take for menopause, those, what do they take? They take
Maca
black
root and
cohosh. They take, I mean, there's a million
yeah,
of them. And they say this
sure.
works great for menopause
I
and you're
see.
going to feel good.
Hmm.
Those are the ones that hit the steroid receptors because they're doing something. The problem is they're doing it in the wrong order. You can't just take them because eventually you'll get sick. Unless the hormones come in at the right time, the right speed, just like that headache. What happens? What's the timing that matters? It's not what's happening, it's the timing.
Yeah, okay. Another question for you, this time about progesterone. Okay. So we talked a little bit about oral progesterone becoming allopregnanolone and putting you to sleep. And okay, that's great, but that's not the point, right? So you, in your protocol, have cream, transdermal progesterone. Can you tell me a little bit more qualitatively about the cream form of progesterone and how that works as opposed to the oral form? Because what I am now hearing a lot more is vaginal and rectal administration of progesterone.
You don't put hormones where the sun don't shine, okay? You just don't. You don't put them in your ear, your nose, your behind, your vagina. No, you don't do that. Because in order for endocrinology to be endocrinology, it must have pulsatility and amplitude. It has to go up and down, and it has to have pulsatility. Now, when you put it on an arm, there's a layer of fat. It goes into the layer of fat. The layer of fat has little capillaries. Every time your heart beats, it goes boom, boom, boom. That's
Mhm.
pulsatility. And if you get the dose right, you've got amplitude. So now you have an endocrine system. Progesterone, if you eat it, for God's sake, goes through the liver and it becomes GABA, actually, and it puts you to sleep.
Mhm.
That's the
Mhm.
deal. And
Mhm.
if you put it in places where there's no fat, no capillaries, rectum, nose, ears, you put it in your eyeball, I don't know, on your vagina, on your, people say you put it on the labia. Who's got a fat labia? Nobody, right? So you don't get the same effect. It's not endocrinology.
So not even the vagina.
No. Why would you do that?
You know about the DHEA that is administered vaginally, the DHEA or the intrarosa for genitourinary syndrome of menopause, for the vaginal atrophy, for the painful
If
sex,
you're
and all of those
looking
other
for
symptoms.
vaginal,
I have seen, yeah.
yeah, if you're looking for vaginal atrophy, if you're looking for
Mhm.
for painful sex, if you're looking for all of the dried out,
Mhm.
first of all, that's estrogen, not
Mhm.
progesterone, or DHEA, it would be estrogen.
Mhm.
You take the estrogen and you fill your body, and all of a sudden you've got a very wet vagina.
Mhm.
So that's not
Okay, so you're
real.
saying that there's an application. Okay.
That's not real. Putting it all over the
What is not real?
putting it in your nose and your
I see.
ears and your rectum and your and even your labia.
So let me just understand this. So you're saying there, in your opinion, DHEA used vaginally has an application, but progesterone used vaginally does not have an application.
No, I don't think DHEA does either. I think you don't know what it does. Tell me what DHEA does. Vaginal.
Right. So, my understanding is the DHEA is a precursor for testosterone, and the genitourinary syndrome, the vulvovaginal area, has a lot of receptors for testosterone. And when we produce lesser and lesser, that leads to these symptoms of atrophy and discomfort and
Actually,
pain and all of that.
we don't produce less and less. Men do. We get testosterone in that place from men during sex. So it's the men who are producing less, not the women. Because women
What
don't.
about the adrenal production?
Huh? Say it again.
What about production from the adrenals, right? That because we are not producing from the ovaries anymore and the adrenal production also goes down. Are you saying that women don't have testosterone production endogenously?
They should have penile vaginal production that goes into us, makes us more androgenized. But the reality is, you have to have internal estrogen to have a wet vagina. You can't put it in the vagina because there's no fat. You can't pick it up. You can't pulse it. You can't do anything with it. That's not how it works. And when you're talking about the adrenals, you're talking about DHEAS comes down, splits, goes to testosterone or estrogen. One of my daughters, it goes to testosterone. She had testosterone of 180 in high school. She went on to have 5 children. She's 47. She's okay, but she's got a big old masculine side. You know what I mean? She's making more testosterone. And every time she has any discomfort during sex, every time something's wrong, she gets fat. Do you know why she gets fat? Aromatase. That testosterone she has that's so much turns into estrogen through aromatase. So it depends on how you convert. It depends on ethnicity. It depends on all kinds of stuff. But it certainly doesn't depend on putting DHEA in your vagina. You know, DHEA, you can put some in and you might feel a little better because, like testosterone, your muscles are a little more. But no. When your adrenals are just fried, they're just gone from everything like a hard life to a bad president. When that happens, it starts to affect your kidneys. And you can tell by kidney problems that your adrenals are going bye-bye. Now, I made something called Spark and Snooze. Spark is actually a pill, and it has hydrocortisone acetate, 5 milligrams, theobromine, which is chocolate, and caffeine in it. And you take it 4 times a day when you would normally pulse your adrenals. And Snooze is melatonin in cream, and it works really well. So you put your adrenals back in the right rhythm, and then you go to bed at night, and then you do it again, and you do it again. And it's called Spark and Snooze, and it works pretty well. And it even works on, my daughter, who obviously she's been anxious all her life. I think her adrenals are just at 47.
So actually, that's a great segue into lights out, into melatonin and vitamin D. So I've been doing some research on this topic because I think it's fascinating, and there've been a couple of books on sleep and all that, and some researchers have talked a lot about melatonin and melanopsin and all of that. So that's great. I want to hear more about this thing called melatonin makes receptors for vitamin D.
Okay. Did you read Lights Out? You remember Lights Out?
Portions of it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that's right. You said you skimmed it.
Yes.
Yeah, you should read the whole thing. It's complicated, but you should read the whole thing. It's about light and dark. It's about the fact that you can't have daytime unless you have nighttime. That's how the world works. It's almost seasonal. In other words, you can't have summer unless you have winter. Okay? And that's what everybody's scared about. Climate change. What's going to happen if there's no winter? Okay? It's important. So when you go to sleep, you have been exposed in the daytime to vitamin D, the sun, right? You can get it from food, you can get it from fish, you can get it from whatever. But if you walk 12 minutes outside in the sun from your car to the Quickie Mart, or you take your baby for a stroll, or you walk to work, you get enough vitamin D to be healthy. Old people in nursing homes sitting by the window, whatever. And yet, the study that Joanne Manson did on 16,000 people, because they wanted to make a prescription vitamin D, everybody had low vitamin D. And she gave them, I don't know, they gave them 10,000 units or something. And they still had low vitamin D. And I was sitting in one of my seminars, and one of the best clinicians we have, Courtney Ridley, was up there talking. And Julie was listening, and she had done the cancer stuff. And I'm watching Courtney talk about vitamin D in bones. And I'm thinking about vitamin D and how much you need. And I realize I actually just threw my hands up and said, "Come on, Courtney," and stopped her. And I said, "Does this sound real to you?" I said, "I'm sure that the receptors for vitamin D, D3, are made by melatonin. It only makes sense." And I had done a lot of melatonin research. Melatonin is the oldest hormone on the planet. I used to think it was estrogen because there are jawless fish from millions of years ago that have estrogen receptors, but they don't have estrogen. That's interesting. So I was looking at melatonin, and it's the oldest. And I found all these papers. I sent you some that melatonin provokes D3 receptor. And if you don't, I said to Joanne Manson, she wanted to do a study on it. And I said, "Do you have any blood left?" Because if you wake up in the morning and you can't wake up, you're just groggy and everybody it's happened to. It's because melatonin has come back because you didn't have enough the night before. And you didn't have enough the night before because you didn't go to bed. You have to understand that we have made our days longer with electric light. They're not supposed to be that long. And when it gets dark out, you don't go out to dinner. You don't eat food. You are food. Animals eat you. Okay? So the world is built in a way that you should go to sleep when it's dark, that you should get up when it's light, and then all those receptors are bouncing off each other. And you can get up and walk for 10 minutes in bright dawn, and you'll feel better all day. It's like taking cortisol. And you can go take a walk as the sun goes down for 10 minutes, and you'll be so tired you can't stay awake. That's how that works. Because everything is in balance, whether it's estrogen or progesterone, and your bones go away or your bones come back, whether it's sunshine or moonlight. That's how the world works. And nobody wants to do it. I asked some guy in Lights Out, really important professor, I called him. And I said, and told him what I thought. And he said, you can do whatever you want, but nobody's ever going to turn the lights off. Never. They're just going to die from heart disease, cancer, because their lives change.
Yeah, that is true. Dr. Sachin Panda wrote a book called Circadian, and in which he talks about the importance of the circadian code, which we have all conveniently forgotten. And he says that not only is the timing of when we go to bed and wake up important, it's also the timing of food, because these are
Oh,
signals to our
absolutely.
body. They tell us something.
Absolutely.
Right.
In Lights Out, I discuss seasonal eating. And you have to understand that during certain times, I mean, it's like cows. Cows have baby cows, and they have them in the spring, and then those baby cows get older in the summer, and then they have baby cows. But if you don't do it that way, you don't have anything to eat. They're dead. Okay? You can't do it another way. So, how animals, mammals, birds, how they all reproduce is in a rhythm that has to be done. And vegetables, my God, when you start vegetables in the spring, they're those little tiny vegetables. I'm trying to think of one that's small, not just peas, but little tiny vegetables. And then as summer goes along, you get to stone fruit, peaches, plums, pears, right? And then as it goes along in the fall, apples are tiny seeds and watermelon, tinier seeds. And then you go on to winter. So everything has a rhythm, and that's how it works. And nobody wants to follow it, and nobody wants to turn the lights off. And there's not much you can do. I mean, how many times have you I've come to somebody's house and it's like a night game at the Yankees? Every light in the place is on. So some of it's metabolism, some of it's metabolic, some of it's in the sense of mitochondria. You get your mitochondria from your mother, how long you live, how you live. That's all mom. And his mom's up till late. So I don't know how much of it's genetic.
Okay. Well, anything else that you think there's a takeaway from Lights Out for us?
Oh my God. I was looking through it today because I wrote it 20 years ago, right? So I thought I should look through this. I put in a lot of physics. I put in a lot of, how ice turns to vapor, turns to what, and human beings, this happens. How the days are too long, that alone will kill you. And when you can't sleep, when sex hormones pour, you can sleep. When you wake up at 1 and 3 or 2 and 4, you've run out of hormones. It's called interval waking. And that starts to happen in perimenopause. You can't stay asleep. And if you use melatonin before you go to bed, it turns off estrogen receptors. And then at 1 o'clock in the morning, they pop back up and you stay asleep. And that works. You need the melatonin before you go to sleep. I put it in the book and I put it in the doctor's manual. How much melatonin you take, it's per hour of darkness before midnight. And then when it's really dark, you take not much. And that'll take care of the estrogen. And then you're not up going to bathroom all night. You're not awake. You're not, So that helps.
I really appreciate all the back and forth, all your responses, all your sharing. Thank you, T.S.
Oh,
Wiley.
you're welcome. Thank you, doctor. I appreciate it.
Okay.